Hello, everyone. Madilynn Dale here with the Chapter Goddess, and I've got a great author for you guys to chat with today. I've also got a cat saying hi because he apparently feels like he needs to be in the show today. But I'm going to bring her up after I show you guys this cool graphic with her book. So check it out. We're going to be talking with Claudia Blodd today. Hey, Miss Claudia.
Hey.
So go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself as I'm fighting my cat over here.
I'm a dog mom, but we're looking at getting a cat. My daughter's talking my husband into getting one. So
they're awesome.
Right.
I have 4, but I also have 2 dogs too. It's kind of hard to be just a dog or cat person.
Exactly. So much love to go around.
Yes. But go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about you and your book.
I'm a little bit of a geek. I have a science background, and I work in IT now. So if science and IT combined together, military wife. My hubby's in the military, and I'm kind of a dork. I love D&D and playing games and fantasy and sci-fi, and there you go.
Sweet. I have a science background too. I actually have a degree in kinesiology, which is basically the study of how the body moves.
Nice.
Not that it goes to any of my writing. Really,
well, exactly, right?
So go ahead and tell us about your book. You've got this book dropping soon, right? Company Assassin.
Yeah, it's actually out, and the whole trilogy is done.
Yeah.
I know. It's complete, which I know is one of those weird things, but Company Assassin is about Duff Roman, and he is an orphan who aged out of the orphanage on this distant jungle planet. Ooh. And it's sci-fi, so there's spaceships a little bit, and there's jungles and aliens and all sorts of crazy things, but yeah, so it's kind of cool. I feel like a little kid going in the background, right?
Yes. Go away. It's part of being mom, parenthood, wife.
Mom,
yes.
Right? Yep, exactly.
Never a dull moment. So when did you start writing this series?
So it started with a dream about the jungle and an alien space kind of thing in the jungle, and they turned on this machine, and an 80s aerobics instructor came in. And so I know, right? She had she had everything, the headband, the whole entire thing.
Yes.
But then the idea kind of percolated. So I don't know if you do this when you write, but you have these ideas, and then they kind of sit in the background, and they ferment, maybe, turn it into something good.
Yeah.
But it took me a couple years to get everything all written out and get it all figured out. That was actually in the second book. So, yeah. Right. I had to write a book before and a book after for anything to make sense.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what you have to do. That's how sometimes a creative brain works. So I totally get that.
Yep. Yeah.
And then you mentioned, okay, I have to ask about this because I liked how you described it, the flashlight method. I'm trying to find where the question went about your writing. I was like, that is the perfect description because it's like you're discovering what comes next because I do a lot of that. I do a rough outline and it always changes. So,
always. Yep.
And where did you come up with that name?
So I really struggled with trying to figure out a process that works with my brain. And I took a number of different classes. So everything from really heavy, plotting and doing all sorts of things. And my problem was I would plot everything out and then I'd be bored and I couldn't write the damn thing. I've got 6 things that have been plotted out that I just cannot write. Yeah. So then I did a bunch of research, and one of the methods that came up in the class is actually called the flashlight method. It's a legit method out there somewhere. I'd have to find the link. But it's the gist that I have is I kind of know where I'm going. So I know I'm going to Alaska, and I know I've got some points I need to get to in advance. And I use my flashlight to look ahead, just ahead enough to follow that path.
I love it because I feel like that's all of my books that have been written like that. I was like, I didn't know it had a name. So, I pulled it up. I was reading it on my phone, just kind of going through everything. And my son was like, the flashlight method. And he's 4. And I was like, yeah, don't worry about it. You just eat your breakfast. So,
yeah.
he was curious about me saying it because I was like, "This is fascinating!" Like,
Yeah.
because it's always I always find it interesting finding different methods and different names for writing methods
Yes.
because there's just like so many
Everybody's brain
different
is
ways.
different, right? Like
Yeah,
we're all
yeah.
different people, so we need different things to be creative and to get it out. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And back on the creative note, where do you get your character inspiration and building inspiration? If I can get my words out, tongue tied. Ah.
um, so the people sometimes they surprise me. I'll just start writing a scene and then something happens and I'm like, huh, okay, well let's see where this goes. I've tried doing some of the okay, so have you ever heard of I'm Input? It's one of those things that are out there where
Mhm.
they kind of do your personality. And so I read a lot and I read a lot of books and I read psychology books
Yeah,
and self-help books and I read and I read and I read. And so I think they kind of get merged together in my head. So the characters come from there. And then
that's
sometimes,
cool.
right? Like sometimes you write a book and you're like, hey, this isn't working. They need something balanced over here. What would
Yeah,
that person be like? And then you start like, would they? And then you start what ifing. Well, let's do a journal entry. Let's do a whatever and see what this person turns out to be.
that's a good idea because that's like creating more background histories too for them. And I've gotten better at doing that. Somebody
Yeah.
shared and I don't know where the template went, but like a character building template
Mhm.
and like to put down their history and everything. And I've started trying to use that more often. Sorry, here it comes. What's up, bud? So you said you're a romance person. You tell me about the romance in your story.
So I'm something of a romantic and I really love people to find that person for them and to have a happy ending, but I can't write romance to save my life or I'd be a romance author. And so I do find myself pairing up some of my characters and having them find love. So, but it's definitely a side thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost more fun to do side things. I tie in romance, but I kind of take mine to the steamy level with my stuff. Because I like to read what I like to call smut. So, um, but it's fun. So does it stick? Like, how quickly do they kind of pair up in the story? Is it in book one, or because you said it's a trilogy?
It's a trilogy, yeah. And in fact, I think most of them come together more in book 2 and 3 than in the beginning. And some of it's pretty subtle. And it's
Mhm.
clean. So like this is really weird. Like I love reading smut. Just
Yeah,
like I love it, but I can't write it to save my life again. So this one
yeah.
is very clean and it's very like action adventure-y. There's monsters
Yes.
and space aliens and like, jungle. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
danger. Yeah.
That's the fun stuff, and it's like I don't know, writing it versus reading it. It's different because I find myself like blushing hardcore when I'm writing some of this stuff, and it's
Yeah.
like okay, like uh,
Well, and I tried. Like I have a short story that's completed that's about a jilted woman on her wedding night with a
hmm
vibrator, and she calls the company to get help because she's not getting an orgasm, and because of the things that she got, they sent a person to her, right? And so like it's just
yeah,
like really like crazy, like cheesy setup. And I did finish it, and it's not too bad, but I can't even imagine like sharing that with anybody. I'm like,
yeah.
oh,
It's awkward. It's kind of like okay, like the story's just gonna sit here because I'm
right here
not
on the hard drive.
yes crazy. So with this, you said this was completed. Did
Yes,
you release all of them like in a quick release kind of
I
succession with
did. Yep.
the trend that's going? Okay. So
Month
you finished
apart.
them all first
Yep.
and then boom, boom, boom.
Okay, so I totally like hosed myself on the third one because it wasn't quite done. And then I started releasing and I had the pre-order out. And then I had like that panicky, oh my God, it's not coming together thing. Cause
Yes.
like what I thought the ending was gonna happen totally didn't happen. And I'm like, what?
That's always the
Yes.
worst. Because I found myself there with one of my books that I published. I think it was the one I dropped in January.
Yeah.
Because I got it, I did most of it with NaNoWriMo last year.
Right.
And then I was like, okay, I'm going to set this date. And like, I kind of like hit this weird pause lump thing. I don't know, whatever you want to call it during the
Yeah.
holidays. I was like, oh my God, I got to finish this book. It's going to release in
It's gonna release. It's
January.
gonna release.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, and yeah, it's crazy because
It's
it is
crazy.
panic inducing, and then the anxiety kicks in and
Oh,
everything
exactly.
else.
And there's something wrong. Like I know there's something wrong, and I'll reread it, and then I will go read a book, or I'll go clean the kitchen. And I finally, I work with someone now that I basically have to call them and be like, okay, so here's all my problems, and like stating it out loud with the person to say, like, in the thing that I'm working on now, it's like, well, I need something to happen in the beginning, but it has to deal with time dilation. So how do I put a deadline on something when different timelines you're going at different speeds? Like, what do you do with that? And how do you make it interesting? And yeah.
That's awesome. So is it like a writing mentor? What is
It's a coach. So I
Okay,
have a
writer.
developmental editor. Yep. A coach that I,
Cool.
that I work with. Yep.
So go ahead and tell me about that more, just because I know there's a lot of viewers and other authors like myself that don't use a writing coach.
Right.
Like, what is that like?
So, what I love about it is that she's got such a great handle on story structure and sort of expectations on the genre. And so when I come with her with my crazy ass ideas and say, okay, so I've got these 6 things that need to come together for this, and we'll brainstorm ideas. And I'd actually talked with her yesterday, and we're talking about the current book that I'm working on. And she gave me this idea, and she's like, you wrinkled your nose. You don't like that idea at all. Okay, let's go with the next idea.
That is too funny. I like that she can pick up on those quirks.
Totally. She's amazing.
Kind of iron everything out and like get you moving forward, though.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And it's kind of like having I don't know, a best friend who writes, but is like really invested in what you're doing. Because I do have friends that I talk to as well, and it's really super helpful, but they're in a different genre, and so they don't necessarily, get what I want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you can bounce the ideas off them, but when you're really stuck on something, like you need that extra push.
I need that extra push. And then she gives me deadlines, and I'm kind of a social deadline person. So she's like, you need to get this done by here. And I'm like, okay.
Hey, if it works, though, it works, because that's hard. Deadlines are hard, and I'm very loose about my deadlines. Maybe I shouldn't be. Although life happens, like this whole, like we were talking before with my son pulling him out of daycare and stuff, and like my writing routine has gone out the window.
And then how do you get it reestablished, right? I've been having the same problem lately.
Oh my gosh.
My kid's school started earlier. We changed school districts. And so then it was an hour earlier, which means I couldn't stay up as late and write because I was a night writer. And I'm like, how do I deal with what?
I know. I've been trying to figure out, I'm like, okay, do I want to switch and try to get up like way before everybody?
But I mean, you're both making faces, right? Like,
yeah, like I know it's like, because I've found myself staying up later, a little bit later lately, except for like the past 2 nights. I've just been like tired. I'm like, I'm just gonna sleep because I need the energy for tomorrow.
Because I need the energy.
Yeah. But like last week, I managed to stay up later a couple nights in a row and get some stuff done. This week, I'm like,
right. And I try to be kind, right? Because this isn't, it's not you just have to like keep going with what you do, keep making small progress. And then, more. And even if it takes you a week to do what should have taken you a day, as long as you're moving forward, that's what matters.
Yes, exactly. But it's hard to like tell yourself that's okay, because your brain's like, no, you need to put something out. Yes. Yeah. It's like, okay, we're getting there. Like, let me just cry as I type out and lose sleep.
And then just add to the whole, then you look back at what you write and you're like, oh God, am I an author or what?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I managed to type up something Monday morning, and I'm like, okay, I've got to go back and edit it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh.
And you are your worst critic, right? Of your own work.
Oh my gosh. How do you work through like criticizing your own work? Like when you go back to start the beginning of the editing stuff. It's like, that's what I like to call it, because editing takes forever.
Editing takes forever. And I've really struggled with it. I ended up knowing myself. So I ended up finding an editor that I could work with, another type of editor. And I would just like constantly send back and forth and try to absorb, because I don't think writing comes easily. And so now I've started to I start at the beginning and I read and edit as I go. And then I end up like kind of almost like circling through multiple times before I send it to somebody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And especially since I don't know if you're like me, where sometimes you like get to way over here and you're like, oh, I need to add this, which means I have to go all the way back here and work in this whole little
yeah. It's a lot of work. And
It's a
then
lot of work.
just completing a book too. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I could write a book, but really you're
Yeah.
like, it's harder than you think. Because once you get started, you have to finish the process.
Right.
Do you find
Right.
yourself getting stuck at some point as you write?
I do, I do, and the thing that I'm working on now is, Renegades Rising, which is the
Mhm.
bad guy in the series, the, Relic trilogy. It's her
Yeah.
story because I love her.
Ooh,
It's kinda
yeah.
terrible, but I love her, um, and I've really struggled because this is not gonna be like, it's not the things that I wanna do just don't fit readily, so it's gonna
Mhm.
end up being 4 novellas and then a novel that brings it all together, and so
Nice.
each of the 4 novellas is gonna be, the different renegades point of view with like setting up all the problems. And I think at the end of all 4, they're going to end up in jail. So I'm like, well, great. I have a cliffhanger at the end of each of those 4 things. Like, how is that going to work?
It'll
And
work.
then come
It'll work.
together. But yeah,
So,
but struggling to try and get because it's got time dilation and it's got like multiple timelines where
mhm.
you couldn't do it straight because you'd have like too much of the first POV and then suddenly another person's going to appear 100 years later. And you're like, well, how does that work? That stinks, right?
Yeah.
So but yes, I was stuck and trying to figure out how to get it all together was really daunting, right?
Yeah,
Because it's, hundreds of thousands worth of words.
it is.
Yeah.
And then do you find it easier to write beginnings, middles, or ends when you write?
So I tend to have an end in mind when I start writing. Um, the beginnings are always hard because you know that you've only got a certain amount of time to try and get somebody's interest and to set it up just right. But they need to feel for the character and they need to like it's this whole like, different. So I find the beginnings the hardest. And then I think the ends, once I kind of get over myself and figure out what's really going on, I love the ends. Like when everything comes together and they finally see their way clear and it's finally like, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, the ending's always my favorite part to write because
Yeah.
you just see everything coming
Yeah.
together, and even like some of them, there's a book series. I don't know if you like Sarah J. Maas, but her Throne of Glass series, her very last book in the series where it ties everything together. It's like the thickest book, but it's also like my favorite of the series because everything comes together
Right.
finally, and it just
I love that. If you can get all the threads together and it
yes.
makes sense and you get that satisfying, like,
Yeah.
yes, this
And
is
she
worth
does
it.
multiple point of view with that book or with
Yeah.
that series. Sorry, I think it's like 7 books. And it's just seeing how everybody comes together at the end. And I kind of like want to know like where they're at post that book.
Right.
And
Right.
I kind of hope maybe she'll do something in the future.
I love
Like
those
with it.
epilogues too, right? When the authors do
Yeah.
that and you can sign up for my newsletter and get an epilogue. And I love those things. And I'll sign up for newsletters just so I can see again those characters later because you want to see them happy
Yes.
or
Yes.
whatever.
Escape into a world of magic and fantasy with Madilynn Dale. Her books will take you on a fantastic adventure from the human realm to fae realms to hell and many more. Each main character has their own story to share. Don't miss her latest release. Get her books on her website, thechaptergoddess.com.
Older.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah. It gets hard in a different way.
tell me about your editing process.
So what I end up doing is starting from the beginning and then I edit, I read and go through and try to kind of work in all those threads that I may have missed because I added something over here. I do also work with both a copy and a different types of like I've got lots of different editors that I work with just
Mhm.
because I'm so paranoid about doing something wrong.
I'm totally probably going to be the same way moving forward. So,
Yeah. And it's hard. And I know my grasp of the English language, like the actual grammar rules, is probably questionable. But I've decided, honestly, after going through a whole bunch of editors, there's a lot of wiggle room in there, depending upon your genre and expectations. Like, so I'm not going to sweat it if something is slightly wrong, right? As long as the
yeah.
story's good, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's the best part. Do you use beta readers during your process?
I have used beta readers. I'm impatient to publish, so I probably don't have as much time between it being done and when it goes out, or I don't leave myself enough time.
Mhm.
But yes, I have used some beta readers, and I have one that I love because she's
Yeah.
very like this is what's going on over here. And this might sound like this. And what about this? You forgot that. And I'm like, thank you.
Those are the good beta readers. You're like, I'm just going to keep you in my pocket. I've come
Yep.
across a few of those. And I'm like, yes.
Yes.
Because one the other day, she read through a short story of mine and like so many things picked out. Well, this, you need to show more emotion here and this. And I was like, holy cow. Like, can
Right?
I
I'm
like,
keeping you.
yeah, like we need to be like friends so you can read all
my stuff. Exactly. Why is
I
that?
was
Like you
like,
find somebody and you're like, come mine. Can I have you?
yes,
Like,
yeah,
thank
like
you.
don't work with anybody else. Stay with me. And because she gave me like suggested that I pick up the emotion thesaurus. Oh, that's a tongue tire. And like go through and like express, because the story, a man summons a demoness and she takes away his ability to express emotion. So it's like you have to, and I didn't think about
Ooh,
expressing all the internal stuff because it is in
right.
his point of view.
Right.
When I like came up with the idea, and I was like, oh gosh, like I really need to express a lot more if he's feeling all this stuff, but they can't see it. But
But they
he's
can't
like,
see it, right? But
yeah,
it's there kind of like in
yeah.
underneath the skin. Yeah.
And I was like,
Emotions is the worst
okay.
too. Like I hate, like I always feel like a whiny, like I'll write something and then I'm joking with a friend, like, okay, sing, 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 sing. So I write like
Yes.
that's supposed to, but I'm like, oh, really? And then an editor will read it and be like, okay, so she just got attacked by killer robots at the spaceport and barely survived her life. And her emotional response was, meh, I'll see him later.
Yeah.
No. And I'm like,
Yeah.
fine, I'll put emotion.
I know. It's so hard because like, and I've always caught myself like you see it differently in your head, but on the
Right.
paper, like it coming out, it's like your brain's like, oh, seeing the image, but the
Yep.
paper doesn't say that. You're like, oh
Doesn't say
crap.
that,
Like,
right?
how do
Well, she
I?
said this, and they're like, no, nah, that doesn't do it. No.
Yeah, like they want to see like how she actually feels, like what's going on and stuff like that. It's hard. It's
It's
a lot of
hard.
thought process into
Well,
it.
and like Ravine, who that character, so she lost her daughter. That's one of the first scenes where she dies and she blames herself and the company, right? Like it's this terrible, terrible thing. And but she's this kind of like cold scientific woman. She's very much in her head. And so it was really hard getting that balance between like, what would you realistically do as sort of this cold, hard person and very
Yeah.
scientific? But I mean, she loves her daughter and blames herself and is just like, so she ended up kind of having a nervous breakdown and ended up like just completely losing her shit.
No, dude, I would
Right?
too. Like if I were in that situation. So that's totally like understandable.
Right.
Especially because as a mom, you already like have that fear
Oh,
anyway. So
yes. And it doesn't get any, yeah. And it's I wrote that part of it when my daughter was the same age as Ravine's daughter. And so like, I'm sitting there and I'm like might have been crying myself, right? Like just picturing not
yes.
that my daughter would ever get, fried by a spacecraft.
Well, yeah,
whatever,
but still, just the
still,
thought it's
yeah,
there, like
it's
something
there.
happening. Man, that makes me emotional sitting
I
here.
know.
Like
And
I'm
then
like, oh,
her story is like, what would you do if you had like the things that she ended up doing and the horrible, horrible thing are all in the name of trying to save her daughter.
yeah,
Right. And how far she went and how many really nasty things. Like I totally don't agree with this is the character, right? Like I don't think I'd ever do this, but she did some really bad things.
yeah.
And got her daughter back. So
It's so totally worth it. So, as a mom, author, and you also work full time, correct?
I do. Yeah, I do have a day
How
job.
do you take care of your mental health? Like, do you have a self care routine? Like, how do you go about taking care of yourself so you can do all the things?
Oh man, yeah. I lose myself in books. I'm not gonna lie. I have read an embarrassing number of books this year, like in the
Nothing
one
wrong with that at all.
girl. And then, and then I like doing silly things like when my husband's not home for whatever reason, I can't do this in front of him, but I love like turning on Alexa and picking songs, like doing the dishes and singing and dancing, right? Like, and I totally suck at it. I mean, it's like,
But it's still fun.
it is still totally fun, right? And my
Yes.
daughter will come in and be like, "Can you play some good songs?" And I'm like,
like, nope, these are good songs.
These are for me, and then you can choose the song next.
Yes, there you go. That's awesome. I do that too. So it's like just jam out. Mine's all stuff from like when I was in high school. So.
Right.
The best songs to jam out to. And then you see those memes where it's like millennials or whatever, their cleaning music used to be their club music. And I'm like, okay. Like Yeah.
Well, and I love those songs you can actually like sing to, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I am not a good singer. Like this is like the Pretty Woman scene with her and the whatever, and she's terrible. Like this is like I'm
Yes.
worse than that.
Great movie. But it lets you express yourself and it kind of lets you kind of
Right. Get out of my head.
yes.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
great form of self-care. I'd like to ask every author I interview because that's something I like to focus on is self-care and how important it is for
Yeah.
creatives in general to do self-care.
It is.
Because a lot of people who are not creatives, they go to creative outlets for self-care. And it's like, well, what do we
Right.
do since we do this like as a
Right.
thing? So
And I love walking the dog, and I actually do really like kettlebells too when I get myself into, they're like the weights with the handle on
yes,
them. And yeah, I've got a couple of
kettlebells are
ladies that,
awesome.
yeah, those are good.
They're fun to
Just,
work with. So
yeah,
and a
just
lot
again,
easier
get
to
out of your
grasp.
head. What's
Yes.
that?
They're a lot easier to grasp than like free
Right.
weights.
Than free
So
weights. Yeah. And you can swing them. And I always have like this image of the kettlebell going flying and like breaking them.
that would be hilarious, but at the same time, like
I know, terrible, but hilarious.
yes,
And it's the author brain, right? Because whenever
yes,
something happens, you're always thinking, well, what would happen if?
yes. That would be crazy, crazy. So Claudia, go ahead and tell our viewers where they can find you and your work.
So the best place is claudiablood.com. It connects to all the social media. Sign up for a newsletter. And I do have some Facebook, but just start at claudiablood.com. The best
Awesome.
place.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.